The Axiom Empire's perfect record. The Axiom Collective had perfected the art of conquest over 5 centuries, bringing 127 civilizations under their rule without ever losing a single campaign. Their method was elegant in its simplicity. Overwhelming force combined with an offer of peaceful integration. They called it the Rendering Protocol, a 3-stage process that had never failed. First came the demonstration, a show of power so absolute that resistance seemed futile. Then came the negotiation period, exactly 48 hours by the target species to consult, calculate, and accept reality. Finally came the integration, where the conquered species maintained their culture and governance while acknowledging Axiom authority and paying tribute. It was conquest without genocide, subjugation without destruction, and it worked because every intelligent species eventually performed the same calculation. Survival under Axiom rule was better than extinction resisting it. High Arbiter Zelthan stood aboard the command carrier Eternal Doctrine, reviewing the intelligence reports on his next assignment with the calm confidence of someone who had orchestrated 89 successful subjugations. Earth, the third planet orbiting a yellow dwarf star humans called Sol, presented a textbook case for rapid integration. The species was young, barely 200,000 years old, with only 150 years of industrial civilization behind them. They had recently achieved basic space travel and had established colonies on their moon and Mars, but their technology was primitive compared to Axiom standards. Their faster-than-light capability was non-existent. Their energy weapons were in early experimental stages, and their defensive systems relied on kinetic projectiles and chemical propulsion. More importantly, humanity was divided, despite recent efforts to form something called the Terran Defense Initiative. Earth remained fractured into 190-plus nations with competing interests, historical grievances, and cultural differences that ran centuries deep. Predicted submission time? Zelthan asked his strategic assessment officer, a Valari female whose species had been the first to join the Axiom 400 years ago. She consulted her data tablet, running through psychological profiles compiled from decades of covert observation. Between 36 and 48 hours, High Arbiter. Humans demonstrate strong survival instincts and practical decision-making when faced with extinction-level threats. Historical data shows they're capable of setting aside differences when confronting existential dangers. Their recent unification attempts suggest awareness of their vulnerability. Once they witness the rendering demonstration, their leadership will recognize resistance as suicide. Zelthan nodded, satisfied. Earth would be his 90th successful integration, another jewel in the crown of Axiom expansion. The fleet, 600 warships carrying enough firepower to crack a planet of Kruff, entered hyperspace bound for the Sol system. They would arrive with the dawn, as was tradition, emerging from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation above Earth's northern hemisphere, where the majority of humanity's leadership was located. The humans would wake to find their sky filled with ships, and by sunset, they would understand their place in the new order. First contact and humanity's defiance. The Axiom fleet emerged from hyperspace at 0647 Universal Coordinated Time on a Tuesday morning, their vessels arranged in the Flower of Inevitability, a formation so vast it could be seen from Earth's surface without magnification. Within minutes, every defense network on the planet detected the arrival, triggering cascading alerts through military and governmental systems worldwide. In Geneva, inside the Crisis Command Center of the Terran Defense Initiative, alarms shrieked as displays lit up with contact signatures. Admiral Sarah Chen, appointed Supreme Commander of Earth's Unified Defense Forces just 3 months earlier, stared at the tactical screen showing 600 capital ships holding position in high orbit. Each vessel was larger than anything humanity had ever built, and preliminary scans suggested technology decades beyond Earth's capability. She had known this day might come. The Axiom scouts had been spotted 18 months ago, giving humanity just enough time to panic, unite partially, and prepare inadequately. Zelthan initiated the rendering protocol's first phase precisely 30 minutes after arrival. Axiom lance beams, invisible until they struck their targets, reached down from orbit and touched 73 military satellites. The satellites didn't explode. They simply went dark. Their systems fused by precision energy strikes that left them intact but completely non-functional. It was the standard demonstration. We can reach anything you have, and we can do it without wasting ammunition. Zelthan then broadcast on all frequencies. His message translated simultaneously into every human language. People of Earth, I am High Arbiter Zelthan of the Axiom Collective. We have brought order to 127 civilizations across 300 star systems. You have witnessed the demonstration of our capability. This is not an attack. It is an invitation to understanding. You cannot resist us. Your technology is insufficient, your force is inadequate, and your divisions make unified defense impossible. But we do not seek your destruction. We offer integration. Maintain your governments, your cultures, your way of life. Acknowledge Axiom authority. Contribute to collective security and prosper under our protection. You have 48 hours to consult and accept. Choose wisely. The response came 14 hours later, not from the diplomatic corps or through official governmental channels, but from Admiral Chen herself, broadcast on every frequency the Axiom fleet was monitoring. Her message was brief, her voice steady and cold as vacuum. High Arbiter Zelthan, we received your demonstration and your offer. Here's our response. We've been killing empires since before we reached the stars. We faced conquerors who believed themselves inevitable, who thought superior numbers meant guaranteed victory, who calculated that we'd surrender rather than fight. They were all wrong. You made one critical mistake in your assessment. You assumed we calculate survival the same way you do. We don't. Some things matter more than living on our knees. You have 24 hours to leave our system. After that, we'll teach you what humanity does to uninvited guests. The transmission ended with footage, a rapid compilation of human history's bloodiest moments. Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held a pass against hundreds of thousands. Stalingrad, where humans fought building to building through a burning city. The siege of Leningrad, where people starved rather than surrender. The message was clear. Humanity had a long history of choosing death over submission. Zelthan stared at the tactical display, experiencing something he hadn't felt in 89 campaigns, genuine confusion. This wasn't how the protocol worked. Species watched the demonstration, performed the survival calculation, and accepted reality. They didn't issue counter-ultimatums. They didn't cite their own history of suicidal resistance as if it were somehow relevant to a technological mismatch of this magnitude. His strategic assessment officer looked equally bewildered. High Arbiter, this is unprecedented. Their response demonstrates either fundamental irrationality or a complete failure to understand their situation. Recommend we proceed to Phase 2, limited engagement, to clarify the reality of their position. Zelthan nodded slowly. Very well. Prepare precision strikes on military installations, non-civilian targets only. Show them what resistance costs while keeping casualties minimal. We'll reconsider once they see their defenses mean nothing. But even as he gave the order, something nagged at him. The absolute confidence in Admiral Chen's voice, as if she had already calculated something he was missing. The first blood, the Axiom's precision strikes, began at 22 UTC, targeting Earth's military spaceports, orbital defense platforms, and advanced weapons research facilities. Lance beams reached down from orbit with surgical accuracy, turning fortified bunkers into glass-lined craters and reducing missile silos to smoking pits. In the first hour, humanity lost 40% of its ground-based military infrastructure and 15,000 personnel, scientists, engineers, and soldiers who never had a chance to fight back. It was meant to be a demonstration, a clarification of power dynamics that would break human will without causing catastrophic casualties. Zelthan watched the strike results with satisfaction. Minimal collateral damage, military targets eliminated with precision, and the human population now understanding that their defenses were meaningless. He composed a second message offering renewed negotiations, certain that Admiral Chen would now accept reality. Instead, humanity launched its fleet. Every warship Earth possessed, 140 vessels ranging from heavy cruisers to converted mining ships hastily armed with railguns, accelerated from hidden positions. They didn't approach cautiously or request engagement terms. They came in attack formation, weapons hot, moving with the desperate speed of people who knew they were outmatched and simply didn't care. Admiral Chen's voice crackled across all channels. All ships, this is Sierra Actual. They think we'll calculate and surrender. Show them we don't do math, we do violence. Engage at will. Make every shot count. Make every death expensive. Make them remember that humans don't go quietly. The human fleet opened fire at extreme range, their primitive railguns hurling slugs of metal at relativistic speeds, while missile salvos filled the space between the fleets with fire and fury. The first engagement lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. Human railgun rounds hammered against Axiom shields, most deflecting harmlessly, but some concentrated fire from multiple ships, managing to penetrate and scar hull armor. Human missiles, crewed by Axiom standards, came in waves that overwhelmed point defense systems through sheer numbers. The Axiom lost no ships in that initial clash, but 3 cruisers suffered damage severe enough to require withdrawal from the battle line, and 1 destroyer's shields failed completely, leaving it vulnerable and forced to retreat behind the main fleet. The humans, by contrast, lost 38 ships, vessels torn apart by Axiom particle beams, crews vaporized in explosions visible from Earth's surface, and wreckage tumbling through orbit. It was a devastating defeat by any military standard. Humanity had lost more than a quarter of its fleet, while barely scratching the Axiom formation. But then something happened that Zelthon had never witnessed in 89 campaigns. The human fleet didn't retreat. The surviving 102 ships regrouped, tightened formation, and prepared for another attack run. Admiral Ten's voice came through again, now broadcast on frequencies the Axiom could intercept. First blood to us. 3 of theirs damage, and they know we can hurt them. All ships regroup at Rally Point Echo. We go again in 6 hours. Damage control teams, you know what to do. Engineering crews, I want every weapon system operational. Pilots, get sleep if you can. Tomorrow we show them that the first engagement was us being polite. Zelthon replayed her transmission 3 times, analyze have tone, the content, the implications. She was treating a catastrophic defeat as if it were a successful probing action. She was speaking as if the loss of 38 ships and thousands of crew members was an acceptable exchange for damaging through Axiom cruisers. Strategic assessment, Zelthan demanded, his voice sharp. Explain their behavior. They've lost more than 25% of their fleet. Standard doctrine says they should be requesting negotiations or retreating to defensive positions. His assessment officer pulled up psychological profiles, scanning through data with increasing confusion. High Arbiter, their historical military doctrine includes something they call acceptable losses. In their wars against each other, they've routinely sacrificed entire armies to achieve strategic objectives. They have a cultural concept called Pyrrhic victory, winning at such cost that it's nearly defeat. But they also have its opposite, making defeat so expensive for the enemy that it achieves strategic goals despite losing the battle. I believe they're not trying to win individual engagements. They're trying to make the entire campaign too expensive to continue. Zelthan felt cold realization settle in his chest. They weren't fighting to conquer or even to survive. They were fighting to make him quit. Increase fleet spacing. All ships maintain maximum defensive posture. They're going to attack again, and next time they'll try something desperate. He was right. 6 hours and 40 minutes after the first engagement, the human fleet attacked again, but not in the frontal assault Zelthan expected. Instead, they split into small hunter groups of 5 to 7 ships each, attacking from multiple vectors simultaneously. Some groups engaged in conventional combat, trading fire with Axiom vessels. Others performed suicide runs, accelerating to maximum speed and deliberately ramming Axiom ships. The destroyer TDES Defiant, crippled and losing atmosphere, locked navigation on the Axiom cruiser off harmonious resolution and fired all engines. Admiral Chen's last words from the Defiant were broadcast fleet-wide. For those who come after us, remember what we bought today. The Defiant struck the harmonious resolution at 12% light speed, penetrating its shields through sheer kinetic energy and rupturing the cruiser's hull. Both ships exploded in a brief, violent sun that lit up Earth's night sky. It was the first Axiom capital ship lost in 500 years of expansion, and humanity had proven they were willing to trade one for one if necessary, using tactics no rational species could ever employ. Because rational species eventually surrendered. Zelthan stared at the debris field where the harmonious resolution had been and understood with chilling clarity. He wasn't fighting a conventional war. He was fighting a philosophy, and he had no idea how to defeat that. Escalation and the death toll rises. Zelthan stood in his command center aboard the Eternal Doctrine, reviewing casualty reports that grew more disturbing with each passing day. 3 weeks into what should have been a 48-hour subjugation, the Axiom fleet had lost 14 capital ships, more than the previous 20 campaigns combined. Human losses were catastrophic by comparison. 4 million dead, 60% of their orbital infrastructure destroyed, and their fleet reduced to 43 operational vessels from the original 140. By every military metric, humanity was being annihilated. Yet Admiral Chen's daily broadcasts continued with the same defiant tone. We're still here, still fighting, and you're still bleeding. How many shits can you afford to lose before your empire starts wondering if we're worth the cost? The question haunted Zelthan, because it was precisely the question his superiors at Axiom High Command were now asking. The escalation came from both sides with grim inevitability. Zelthan, under pressure to end the campaign, authorized strikes on dual-use infrastructure, power plants, water treatment facilities, and transportation hubs that served both military and civilian populations. The goal was to create economic collapse, to make the human population demand their leaders surrender to end the suffering. Axiom lance beams carved through Earth's infrastructure with methodical precision. Cities went dark across entire continents. Supply chains collapsed. Hospitals lost power. The death toll climbed from 4 million to 7 million, then to 9 million, as the secondary effects of infrastructure destruction rippled through human civilization. Zelthan composed detailed reports, justifying each target, emphasizing the minimal civilian casualties relative to military necessity. But the numbers still troubled him. This wasn't how the rendering protocol was supposed to work. Humanity's response was to double down on asymmetric warfare. They scattered their remaining fleet assets, making them impossible to eliminate in a single engagement. They armed civilian vessels, cargo haulers, mining ships, even luxury yachts, with improvised weapons and sent them on kamikaze runs against Axiom supply convoys. They deployed orbital mines in shipping lanes, forcing Axiom vessels to slow down and scan everything. They hacked into captured Axiom escape pods and used them to broadcast false distress signals, luring Axiom rescue ships into ambush zones. Admiral Chen's tactical doctrine, leaked to the press and broadcast globally to maintain morale, was brutally simple. We can't win battles, so we win hours and days. Every hour they're here is an hour they're not conquering someone else. Every day they stay is a day their empire looks weak. Our job isn't to defeat them. It's to make them defeat themselves by making this too expensive, too long, too embarrassing to continue. The Axiom military, trained for centuries in conventional fleet actions and siege warfare, struggled against an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. Their doctrine assumed rational actors who would protect their infrastructure, consolidate their forces, and eventually sue for peace when losses became unsustainable. Humans did none of these things. They abandoned defensive positions to launch attacks. They sacrificed infrastructure to deny Axiom safe anchorage points. They broadcast their casualties publicly, turning each death into propaganda that hardened resistance rather than encouraged surrender. Zelthan's strategic staff ran simulation after simulation, each one showing the same conclusion. Complete subjugation would require at least 8 more months and cost an estimated 150 to 200 additional Axiom ships. They would win eventually through sheer attrition, but the cost would be unprecedented and the example would be catastrophic. The secret weapon and the Battle of Luna. While Earth's public resistance continued its desperate asymmetric warfare, a secret program was racing toward completion in hardened bunkers beneath the lunar surface. Project Prometheus, initiated the day the Axiom fleet arrived, had one goal: reverse engineer Axiom technology from captured wreckage and destroy vessels. It was humanity's longest of long shots, trying to understand in weeks what had taken the Axiom centuries to develop. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project's lead scientist, had assembled a team of the brightest minds from 40 nations, working in shifts around the clock while the war raged overhead. They had fragments of Axiom shield generators, pieces of their energy weapons, and most critically, a nearly intact power core from the Harmonious Resolution, recovered from the debris field after the Defiant suicide run. The breakthrough came on day 47 of the siege, when Dr. Vasquez's team successfully activated a captured Axiom shield generator using a jury-rigged human power supply. The shield flickered, failed, and nearly exploded. But for 3.7 seconds, it worked. That was enough. Within 10 days, they had stabilized the technology sufficiently to retrofit it onto human vessels. The shields were temperamental, required constant recalibration, and had a disturbing tendency to fail catastrophically if pushed beyond 60% capacity. But they worked. More importantly, they proved that Axiom technology wasn't incomprehensible alien science. It was just engineering humanity hadn't figured out yet. Admiral Chen ordered the immediate retrofit of 15 vessels, pulling them from the active combat roster despite the desperate tactical situation. The crews were told they were being equipped with experimental systems that might kill them just as easily as protect them. Every single crew volunteered anyway. The Battle of Luna began at 0430 UTC on day 62 of the siege, when Admiral Chen launched her hybrid fleet against an Axiom resupply convoy approaching from the outer system. The convoy consisted of 8 cargo vessels escorted by 12 warships, standard procedure for Axiom logistics operations. What made this convoy special was its cargo, advanced sensor equipment, and fresh personnel to replace Axiom losses. Destroying it wouldn't change the strategic situation, but it would send a message. The human hybrid fleet, 15 ships with names like Prometheus, Pandora's Box, and Icarus, that reflected humanity's mythological relationship with stolen fire, approached from multiple vectors, using Luna's mass to mask their approach. When they emerged, Axiom sensors detected them immediately, but classified them as standard human vessels. That classification lasted exactly 17 seconds, until the human ships activated their captured shield technology. Zelfon watched the engagement from his command center with growing horror. The human vessels, which should have been torn apart in seconds by Axiom particle beams, were shrugging off hits. Their shields flickered and strained, and 2 ships lost shielding completely and were destroyed. But 13 ships punched through the convoy's defensive perimeter. They didn't target the cargo vessels. Instead, they focused all fire on the warships, using concentrated railgun barrages to overload Axiom shields through sustained bombardment. The battle lasted 8 hours, a grinding slugfest that saw the human fleet employ tactics they'd learned from 6 weeks of Pesper combat. They used the cargo vessels as cover, forcing Axiom warships to choose between firing through their own logistics ships or repositioning. They timed their attacks to strike when Axiom shields were regenerating from previous hits. They employed ramming attacks with damaged vessels, turning every crippled ship into a kinetic weapon. When the smoke cleared, the butcher's bill was staggering. Humanity lost 11 of its 15 hybrid vessels, but the Axiom convoy was annihilated. All 12 escort warships were destroyed or crippled beyond repair, and 6 of the 8 cargo vessels were venting atmosphere and cargo into space. The 2 surviving human ships, the Prometheus and Pandora's Box, limped back to lunar orbit, broadcasting footage of the engagement. Admiral Chen's voice accompanied the footage. Day 62, and we just proved something critical. Your technology isn't magic, it's engineering. We stole it, we learned it, and we used it to kill 12 of your warships. Every day we survive, we get smarter. Every ship you lose, we salvage and study. Time is on our side now. The question you need to ask yourself, High Arbiter, how many more ships do you want to donate to humanity's education? The footage spread across Earth in hours, and something shifted in human morale. They weren't just resisting anymore. They were adapting, learning, evolving into a threat that grew more dangerous with each passing day. The Axiom's internal crisis. The Battle of Luna triggered cascading effects throughout Axiom space that Zelfon had feared but not anticipated in their severity. Within 3 days, he received an encrypted priority message from Axiom High Command that was terse and pointed. Status report, campaign duration 65 days. Fleet losses, 26 capital ships, 7% of total force commitment. Galactic attention maximum. Vassal species monitoring situation closely. Reports of unrest in Valari, Kethrin, and Sorvax sectors. Assessment. Sol 3 campaign has become strategic liability. Recommend immediate escalation to total suppression or strategic withdrawal. Current approach achieving neither conquest nor deterrence. Decision required within 10 days. Zelfon read the message 3 times, each reading making his situation clearer and more dire. He wasn't just fighting humanity anymore. He was fighting to preserve the Axiom Empire's reputation for inevitability. The unrest in vassal territories was the knife that truly cut deep. For 500 years, the Axiom had maintained order through the perception that resistance was futile. Species that surrendered after the rendering demonstration were treated well. They kept their governments, their cultures, their autonomy and internal affairs. They simply paid tribute and contributed to collective defense when called upon. It was a system that worked, because every species calculated that submission was better than destruction, and every new conquest reinforced that calculation. Earth was breaking that calculation publicly and loudly. If a primitive species with inferior technology could resist the Axiom for 2 months and counting, what did that say about the species that had surrendered after 2 days? The Valari, the Axiom's first conquest 400 years ago, were particularly problematic. Intelligence reports showed underground broadcasts celebrating Earth's resistance, discussion groups analyzing human tactics, and worst of all, academic papers questioning the Valari government's original decision to surrender. The debate raged for hours before Zelfon finally made his position clear. We cannot annihilate Earth without destroying everything the Axiom stands for. Our empire is built on the premise of benevolent hegemony, that submission to us is better than the chaos of independent survival. If we demonstrate that submission is merely delayed annihilation, every vassal species will start preparing for rebellion. But we also cannot continue this stalemate indefinitely. Every day we remain here, humanity gets stronger and our position gets weaker. He paused, staring at the tactical display showing Earth's battered but still functioning defensive network. I need recommendations for forcing surrender without wholesale destruction. And someone explained to me how a species this primitive is outmaneuvering an empire that has conquered 127 civilizations. His cultural analysis officer, who had been quietly studying human broadcasts and communications, finally spoke up. High Arbiter, permission to offer an unconventional assessment. When Zelfon nodded, she continued. Humans don't think they're fighting a military campaign. They think they're fighting an existential philosophical battle. Every species we've conquered calculated that living under our rule was acceptable. Humans have calculated that living under anyone's rule is unacceptable. They're not defending territory or resources. They're defending an idea, and you cannot kill an idea with particle beams. Zelfon dismissed his staff and sat alone in his command center, watching Earth rotate beneath him. The planet was scarred now, cities dark, infrastructure shattered, but still the resistance continued. He had underestimated them catastrophically, not their military capability, which was indeed as primitive as assessed, but their psychological resilience. The Axiom had conquered species with superior technology, larger populations, and stronger defensive positions. But they had never encountered a species that simply refused to perform the survival calculation. Humans have decided that some things were worse than death, and living under Axiom rule was one of them. That made them uniquely dangerous because it meant conventional conquest was impossible. You could kill them all, or you could leave them alone, but you could not make them submit. And the longer the siege continued, the more other vassal species would start wondering if they too had miscalculated when they surrendered. The message that changed everything. On day 78 of the siege, with Axiom High Command's deadline looming and pressure mounting from all sides, Zelthon made a decision that would define his career and potentially alter the course of galactic history. He opened a direct communication channel to Admiral Sarah Chen, bypassing all diplomatic protocols and military formalities. The transmission was simple. Admiral Chen, this is High Arbiter Zelthon. I request a private conversation between commanders, not representatives. No recording, no witnesses, just two people trying to understand this situation clearly. Will you accept? The response came 4 hours later. Chen's voice as steady as ever. High Arbiter, I accept. But understand, I'm not negotiating surrender. If that's your goal, we're wasting each other's time. If you actually want to understand what you're facing, I'll talk. Your move. The conversation lasted 3 hours and was never officially recorded. Though both commanders kept private logs that would later become historical documents. Zelfan opened with a question that had haunted him for 11 weeks. Admiral, I have studied your species extensively. You have histories of rational decision-making, of survival instincts, of choosing life over pointless death. Your casualty count is now 17 million. Your infrastructure is 60% destroyed. Your fleet is reduced to scattered remnants. By every strategic measure, you have lost this war. Yet you continue resisting as if victory is still possible. I need to understand why. What calculation am I missing? Chen's response was measured, almost sympathetic. High Arbiter, you're not missing a calculation. You're missing the fact that we're not calculating. You've conquered 127 civilizations using the same method. Demonstrate overwhelming force, offer submission, and let them calculate that submission is preferable to annihilation. Every species you faced performed that calculation and chose survival. You thought we would too. And you did not? Zelfan asked. Chen's laugh was bitter. Oh, we calculated. Our smartest people ran the numbers 1,000 different ways. Every simulation, every model, every analysis showed the same result. Fighting you is suicide. We knew we'd lose. We accepted that before your first ship fired. The difference is that we ran a second calculation you don't seem to understand. We calculated what life under your rule would be like. What it would mean to tell our children that we handed them over to an empire because we were afraid to fight. We calculated the value of freedom, dignity, and self-determination. And we decided those things are worth dying for. You can't conquer that with particle beams. High Arbiter, you can kill us all, but you can't make us submit. There's a difference. Zelthon felt something shift in his understanding, a fundamental recalibration of his strategic framework. You're saying humans value autonomy over survival? That is irrational from an evolutionary perspective. Chen's voice hardened. Is it? We've survived on a death world for 200,000 years by being too stubborn to quit when things got bad. We've built civilizations by believing some things matter more than individual survival. We've reached the stars because we were willing to risk everything for discovery. You call it irrational, we call it human. And here's what you need to understand. Every day you're here, every ship you lose, every human that dies fighting you, we're sending a message to every species in the galaxy that resistance is possible. You haven't just failed to conquer Earth, you failed to prove that conquest is inevitable. How many vassal species are watching right now, wondering if they surrendered too quickly? The question hit Zelthon like a physical blow, because it articulated his worst fear. You're fighting not to win, but to inspire rebellion across axiom space. Chen's confirmation was almost gentle. Now you're understanding. We're not trying to defeat your fleet. We're trying to defeat your empire's foundational premise. You've built everything on the assumption that intelligent beings will choose submission over death. We're proving that assumption false. Every day we resist, every ship we destroy, every adaptation we make to your technology, we're showing the galaxy that empires can be resisted. You can kill every human alive, but the idea will survive. Other species will study what we did and do it better. You're not fighting a military campaign, High Arbiter. You're fighting a revolution you accidentally started by assuming we'd surrender like everyone else. The conversation ended with a question from Zelthon that surprised even himself. If I ordered my fleet to withdraw today, what would you do? Chen's answer was immediate. We'd rebuild, we'd prepare, and we'd make damn sure that humanity never forgets what it costs to stay free. We'd also reach out to every species watching this and offer to share what we've learned about resisting empires. You'd create exactly what you're trying to prevent. A network of resistance across the galaxy. Your choice, High Arbiter. Lose ships and time conquering us completely, or lose credibility by withdrawing. Either way, the Axiom Empire's age of easy conquest is over. We made sure of that. Zelthon closed the channel and sat in silence, staring at Earth. Admiral Chen was right. He had been fighting the wrong war from the beginning, and now there were no good options left. Only degrees of defeat. The galaxy watches and changes. The withdrawal decision and its aftermath. Day 94 of the siege marked the longest subjugation campaign in Axiom history by a factor of 3. Zelthon received his final orders from High Command, delivered by encrypted quantum communication. Strategic assessment complete. Sol 3 campaign, consuming unacceptable resources with no resolution timeline. Vassal unrest expanding to 14 sectors. Military command consensus. Withdrawal required to preserve strategic position. Authorization granted for full fleet withdrawal with face-saving diplomatic cover. Official position. Earth system designated strategic reserve for future integration when species reaches appropriate technological maturity. Actual position. Avoid engagement indefinitely. Your career will survive this, Zelthon, but the Empire's reputation will take years to recover. Execute withdrawal within 48 hours. Zelthon read the orders 3 times before accepting their reality. After 5 centuries of unbroken conquest, the Axiom Empire was retreating from a species that couldn't even achieve faster-than-light travel. The withdrawal was executed with all the precision and dignity the Axiom could muster. Ships departed in perfect formation, their movements synchronized to demonstrate that they were leaving by choice, not fleeing in defeat. Zelthon composed a final broadcast to Earth that was masterful in its diplomatic ambiguity. People of Earth, the Axiom Collective acknowledges your resistance and your determination to maintain independence. While we possess the capability to continue this engagement indefinitely, we recognize that the integration of species must be mutually beneficial. Earth has demonstrated that it is not yet ready for Axiom partnership. We therefore designate your system as a protected development zone to be revisited when your civilization has matured sufficiently to appreciate the benefits of collective membership. This is not defeat. This is patience. The message was designed to preserve Axiom prestige while acknowledging reality, but everyone watching across the galaxy understood the truth. Earth had won by refusing to lose. The global reaction was complex and profound. Celebrations erupted in cities across Earth, but they were tempered by mourning for the dead and visible scars of war. Memorials were planned for every major city, listing names of the fallen and the ships lost. The economic recovery plan would take decades and require unprecedented international cooperation. But the Terran Defense Initiative, forged in desperation, had proven effective enough that no one seriously proposed dissolving it. Humanity had learned a brutal lesson about galactic realities. They were not alone, they were not safe, and they were definitely not respected by the powers that ruled the stars. The unity born of existential threat would need to be maintained through peacetime, a challenge perhaps greater than the war itself. But one thing was certain. Earth would never again be unprepared. The salvaged Axiom technology became the foundation for a crash program to reverse engineer faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and advanced defensive systems. If the Axiom returned in 50 years or... The global reaction was complex and profound. Celebrations erupted in cities across Earth, but they were tempered by mourning for the dead and visible scars of war. Memorials were planned for every major city, listing names of the fallen and the ships lost. The economic recovery plan would take decades and require unprecedented international cooperation. But the Terran Defense Initiative, forged in desperation, had proven effective enough that no one seriously proposed dissolving it. Humanity had learned a brutal lesson about galactic realities. They were not alone, they were not safe, and they were definitely not respected by the powers that ruled the stars. The unity born of existential threat would need to be maintained through peacetime, a challenge perhaps greater than the war itself. But one thing was certain: Earth would never again be unprepared. The salvaged Axiom technology became the foundation for a crash program to reverse engineer faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and advanced defensive systems. If the Axiom returned in 50 years or... The ripple effect across the galaxy, the Axiom withdrawal from Earth, sent shockwaves through civilized space that High Command had feared but underestimated in their severity. Within 6 months, the first vassal species formally declared independence. The Valari Republic, the Axiom's very first conquest 4 centuries ago, had watched Earth's resistance with particular intensity. Their leaders had spent 400 years justifying their original surrender with variations of "we had no choice" and "resistance would have been genocide." Earth proved both statements wrong. On the 200th anniversary of their subjugation, timing chosen deliberately for maximum symbolic impact, the Valari Parliament convened an emergency session and voted 847-12 to reclaim independence. First Senator Chorus, great-granddaughter of the senator who had voted for surrender 4 centuries ago, delivered a speech that was broadcast across Valari space and leaked to every vassal species in the Axiom sphere. Our ancestors calculated that survival under Axiom rule was better than extinction. They were wise, cautious, and wrong. Earth has shown us what our ancestors could not see, that submission is a choice, not a destiny. A primitive species with inferior technology held the Axiom for 94 days and forced them to withdraw. What does that say about us? We who surrendered after 48 hours? Our ancestors were not cowards. They were simply the first, with no example to follow. But we have Earth's example now. We know resistance is possible. We know the Axiom can be made to quit. And we know that 400 years of comfortable submission has cost us something precious: our dignity. The Axiom response to Valari independence was swift and followed the rendering protocol exactly: 600 warships, overwhelming demonstration, 48-hour deadline. But this time, the Valari didn't surrender. They had spent 6 months studying every documented detail of Earth's campaign, analyzing tactics, and preparing their own resistance doctrine. Unlike Earth, the Valari had technology comparable to the Axiom. They had, after all, been part of the collective for 400 years and had access to advanced systems. What they had lacked was the will to fight. Earth gave them that will. The Valari fleet met the Axiom subjugation force at the outer edge of their system and employed human-inspired tactics: hit-and-run attacks, suicide runs against high-value targets, asymmetric warfare that avoided fleet engagements in favor of bleeding the Axiom through 1,000 cuts. The first engagement lasted 8 days and cost the Axiom 23 ships. The Valari lost more, 47 vessels destroyed, but they had started with over 300 ships and could replace losses from their own shipyards. More importantly, they demonstrated the same stubborn refusal to surrender that Earth had shown. The Valari rebellion triggered a cascade effect that Axiom High Command watched with mounting horror. Within 18 months of Earth's resistance, 7 vassal species declared independence. The Kethran sovereignty, subjugated 120 years ago, rose in rebellion and employed tactics even more ruthless than Earth's. They militarized their entire civilian population, turned every orbital station into a fortress, and made their system so costly to invade that the Axiom simply couldn't afford the casualties. The Sorvax Collective, conquered 200 years prior, took a different approach. They didn't fight initially, but instead sabotaged their tribute payments, accidentally destroyed infrastructure the Axiom relied on, and engaged in passive resistance that made governing them more expensive than the tribute was worth. Each rebellion was unique, but all shared a common inspiration. Earth had proven that empires could be resisted, and vassal species across the galaxy were no longer willing to accept subjugation as inevitable. The Axiom Empire, which had spent 500 years expanding through relatively bloodless conquest, suddenly found itself fighting simultaneous counterinsurgency campaigns across 20 systems. Their military, designed for short subjugation campaigns against isolated targets, was woefully unprepared for sustained warfare against determined resistance movements that had studied Earth's example. Fleet resources were stretched thin as commanders tried to maintain control of rebellious vassals while preventing new rebellions from starting. The calculus that had made the rendering protocol effective, that one overwhelming show of force could secure submission, was broken. Now every subjugation campaign became a potential quagmire, every vassal species a potential rebellion, and every show of force a demonstration that simply attracted more resistance. Within 5 years of Earth's resistance, the Axiom Empire had contracted by 35% and was still hemorrhaging territory. The age of easy conquest was indeed over, killed not by military defeat, but by the idea that conquest could be resisted. The formation of the Free Species Coalition. Earth's recovery proceeded faster than anyone expected, driven by a combination of necessity, captured Axiom technology, and the international unity that somehow survived the crisis. Dr. Elena Vasquez's reverse engineering program, which had produced the hybrid shield technology during a war, made breakthrough after breakthrough as humanity studied salvaged Axiom vessels. 18 months after the siege ended, human scientists successfully test-fired the first human-built faster-than-light drive. It was crude, inefficient, and could only manage 2 light-years per day compared to the Axiom's 50, but it worked. Humanity was no longer confined to the Sol system. Admiral Chen, promoted to Secretary General of the reformed Terran Defense Initiative, now the Terran Systems Alliance, immediately proposed an audacious strategy. Reach out to the rebel species across the galaxy and offer an alliance based on mutual defense and shared resistance doctrine. The first diplomatic mission departed Earth 3 years after the siege ended, carrying not weapons, but information. The TSS Unity, humanity's first true starship, jumped to Valari space with a simple message. You stood with us by example when you rose against the Axiom. We stand with you now in reality. We offer alliance, shared technology, and the tactics that made Earth too expensive to conquer. We ask nothing except mutual defense and the agreement that free species stand together against empires that demand submission. The Valari response was enthusiastic. They had been fighting the Axiom for 3 years and losing slowly, their fleet worn down by constant engagements. Earth's arrival, with tactical advisors, detailed analysis of Axiom weaknesses, and captured technology schematics, changed the strategic balance. Within 6 months, Valari forces, using human tactics, had inflicted such casualties on Axiom occupation forces that the Axiom withdrew, designating Valari space another strategic reserve for future integration. The pattern was set. Over the next 5 years, Earth's diplomatic missions reached 14 rebel species and 8 neutral powers that had maintained independence through isolation or fortunate geography. The proposal was always the same. Join the Free Species Coalition, a mutual defense pact with no central government, no tribute requirements, and no submission demanded. Member species remained fully sovereign, but committed to collective defense against any empire that attempted conquest. They shared technology, tactical doctrine, and intelligence about potential threats. Most importantly, they shared the philosophical framework that Earth had demonstrated, that some things were worth fighting for regardless of cost, and that empires could be resisted if enough species refused to calculate submission as acceptable. By year 7 after Earth's siege, the Free Species Coalition had 23 member species and was growing monthly as more vassal species broke free and neutral powers sought security through alliance rather than isolation. The coalition's first major test came when the Kethrin sovereignty, a newer member, faced invasion from the Vortan hegemony, a different empire than the Axiom, but similar in method and ambition. The Vortan sent 400 ships, expecting standard resistance and quick submission. Instead, they encountered a Kethrin fleet backed by coalition advisors, employing tactics refined across a dozen resistance campaigns, and supported by rapid response forces from 6 coalition species, including Earth. The Battle of Kethrin lasted 9 weeks and ended with Vortan withdrawal after losing 78 ships. They had achieved nothing except proving that the coalition's mutual defense commitment was real. Admiral Chen, now elderly and serving more as strategic advisor than field commander, watched the battle reports with grim satisfaction. "This is what we bought with 18 million lives," she told her staff. "Not just Earth's freedom, but proof that empires can't conquer freely anymore. The galaxy has changed, and we changed it by refusing to surrender." Zelthan's final report and the Axiom Reckoning. High Arbiter Zelthan spent his remaining years in service assigned to the Axiom Strategic Studies Institute, far from active campaigns and political power. His career had survived the Earth debacle, but only barely, and only because High Command recognized that the failure was systemic rather than individual. Zelthan's final assignment was to produce the comprehensive analysis of the Sol 3 campaign, for use by future Axiom commanders. The report took 3 years to complete and ran to 4,000 pages, but its essential conclusions could be summarized in a few devastating paragraphs that would reshape Axiom's strategic doctrine. The rendering protocol succeeded for 500 years because it was based on a single assumption, that intelligent species prioritize survival over all other considerations. This assumption held true for 127 civilizations. Earth proved it false. Species designation, Death Worlder. Psychological profile, values abstract concepts, freedom, dignity, self-determination, above physical survival. Willing to accept catastrophic casualties to prevent subjugation. Possesses cultural framework that celebrates resistance against impossible odds. Military doctrine emphasizes making conquest prohibitively expensive rather than achieving victory. The report continued with detailed tactical analysis. Humanity employed 3 strategic pillars that made conventional subjugation impossible. First, asymmetric warfare that avoided decisive engagements in favor of cumulative attrition. Our fleet was never in danger of destruction, but losses accumulated beyond acceptable thresholds. Second, rapid technological adaptation. Humans reverse-engineered captured technology mid-campaign, nullifying our technological advantage within 60 days. Third, psychological warfare. By broadcasting their resistance galaxy-wide, humans transformed their military campaign into an ideological conflict. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to inspire, and they succeeded. Recommendation: avoid engagement with Death Worlder species. Cannot be conquered by conventional means without total annihilation, which violates collective principles and creates mardos that inspire additional resistance. Cost-benefit analysis universally negative. The report's final section addressed the broader implications. The Sol 3 campaign has fundamentally altered galactic power dynamics. Prior to Earth's resistance, the rendering protocol succeeded because vassal species believed submission was inevitable. Oath demonstrated that inevitability was an illusion. This revelation triggered cascading rebellions that have cost the collective 35% of our territory and immeasurable prestige. We face a choice: adapt our methods or accept continued contraction. Recommendation: transition from conquest-based expansion to alliance-based integration. Offer partnership rather than demanding submission. Species that choose to join the collective freely will not rebel. Species that refuse should be avoided rather than conquered, as conquest now carries prohibitive costs in both military resources and reputation. The age of empire by force has ended. Earth ended it. Zelthan signed the report, submitted it to High Command, and retired shortly thereafter. His legacy, forever tied to the campaign that broke the Axiom's 500-year winning streak. The report continued with detailed tactical analysis. Humanity employed 3 strategic pillars that made conventional subjugation impossible. First, asymmetric warfare, that avoided decisive engagements in favor of cumulative attrition. Our fleet was never in danger of destruction, but losses accumulated beyond acceptable thresholds. Second, rapid technological adaptation. Humans reverse-engineered captured technology mid-campaign, nullifying our technological advantage within 60 days. Third, psychological warfare. By broadcasting their resistance galaxy-wide, humans transformed their military campaign into an ideological conflict. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to inspire, and they succeeded. Recommendation: avoid engagement with Deathworlder species. Cannot be conquered by conventional means without total annihilation, which violates collective principles and creates martyrs that inspire additional resistance. Cost-benefit analysis universally negative. The report's final section addressed the broader implications. The Sol 3 campaign has fundamentally altered galactic power dynamics. Prior to Earth's resistance, the rendering protocol succeeded because vassal species believed submission was inevitable. Earth demonstrated that inevitability was an illusion. This revelation triggered cascading rebellions that have cost the collective 35% of our territory and immeasurable prestige. We face a choice: adapt our methods or accept continued contraction. Recommendation: transition from conquest-based expansion to alliance-based integration. Offer partnership rather than demanding submission. Species that choose to join the collective freely will not rebel. Species that refuse should be avoided rather than conquered, as conquest now carries prohibitive costs in both military resources and reputation. The age of empire by force has ended. Earth ended it. Zelthan signed the report, submitted it to High Command, and retired shortly thereafter, his legacy forever tied to the campaign that broke the Axiom's 500-year winning streak. Earth's legacy and the new galactic order. 20 years after the siege, Earth had transformed from an isolated, primitive species into a key power in galactic politics. The Sol system bristled with defensive installations that incorporated the best of human engineering and captured alien technology. Earth's fleet numbered 800 vessels, each one a hybrid design that combined human tactical doctrine with reverse-engineered systems from a dozen different species. Humanity had not become an empire. Admiral Chen's final policy directive before retirement explicitly prohibited conquest or subjugation of other species. But they had become the philosophical and tactical center of the resistance movement that reshaped the galaxy. The Terran Tactical Institute, established on Luna, trained officers from 40 species in asymmetric warfare, resistance operations, and the psychological framework that made Earth's defense possible. Its motto, carved above the entrance in 100 languages, read, "They calculate, we resist." The cultural impact of Earth's resistance rippled through galactic civilization in unexpected ways. Human philosophy, literature, and history became subjects of intense study by species trying to understand how such a primitive civilization had accomplished what advanced powers could not. Earth's historical records of resistance movements, from Spartans to partisans to independence movements, were analyzed, debated, and incorporated into military doctrine across dozens of species. Human concepts like liberty or death, live free or die, and freedom isn't free were translated into hundreds of languages and became rallying cries for resistance movements throughout the galaxy. Earth hadn't just won a military campaign. It had exported an ideology that empires found almost impossible to counter because it didn't rely on technology or resources. It relied on the willingness to sacrifice for abstract principles. A Free Species Coalition, now 47 members strong, had become the fastest-growing political alliance in known space. Its appeal was simple: maintain sovereignty, receive mutual defense guarantees, and gain access to shared technology and tactical support. No tribute, no submission, no loss of independence. For species that valued autonomy, it was an obvious choice. For species still under imperial rule, it was an inspiration and a goal. The coalition's charter, primarily drafted by human diplomats with input from member species, explicitly prohibited offensive warfare and conquest. Member species could defend themselves, defend allies, and resist aggression, but could not initiate conquest. It was a defensive alliance in the truest sense, designed to make conquest prohibitively expensive while avoiding becoming an empire itself. Critics called it naive and unsustainable. Supporters called it the future of galactic civilization. Admiral Sarah Chen died at age 87, 23 years after the siege that defined her life and legacy. Her state funeral was attended by representatives from 60 species, including, surprisingly, an Axiom delegation sent by the Reformed Confederation to pay respects. Chen's final public statement, recorded weeks before her death, was characteristically blunt. "We didn't save Earth by being heroes. We saved it by being too stubborn to quit and too crazy to calculate the odds honestly. Every species that stood up to Empire after us did the same thing. They refused to accept that submission was inevitable." That's not military genius. That's just deciding some things matter more than survival. I'm proud we did it first, but I'm prouder that we weren't the last. The galaxy is better because empires can't conquer freely anymore. That's worth 18 million lives. I hope history agrees. The memorial constructed in Geneva listed not just Earth's dead, but the casualties from every resistance campaign inspired by Earth's example, a number that exceeded 200 million across 30 species. Beneath the names, a single question carved in stone. What are you willing to resist? The Death Worlder designation and humanity's reputation. In the galactic intelligence community, Earth acquired a designation that was equal parts respect and warning. Death Worlder species, threat classification, extreme. The classification wasn't based on military power. Dozens of species possessed superior technology and larger fleets. It was based on psychological profile and historical behavior pattern. Intelligence reports from multiple empires described humanity in similar terms. Species demonstrates abnormal willingness to accept casualties in pursuit of abstract objectives. Standard cost-benefit analysis, unreliable when applied to human decision-making. Possesses cultural framework that glorifies resistance against superior forces. Technological adaptation rate extreme. Reverse engineers captured systems within months. Recommendation: avoid engagement unless prepared for extended campaign with high casualties and uncertain outcome. Notable: human resistance inspired 30-plus Vaal rebellions in past 2 decades. Treating humans as targets of opportunity may trigger coalition response involving 40-plus species. Risk-reward assessment universally negative. The classification spread beyond official intelligence channels into popular culture and galactic mythology. Within a generation, Death Worlder entered common galactic vocabulary as both a specific designation for Earth-type high-gravity planets and a general term for species that fought with apparently suicidal determination. Young soldiers from a dozen species adopted it as a badge of honor. Resistance movements printed it on flags and banners. Empire military academies taught entire courses on Death Worlder doctrine and how to counter it. The honest conclusion: don't fight Death Worlders if you can possibly avoid it. Humanity found the designation simultaneously amusing and annoying. They didn't think of themselves as crazy or suicidal, just committed to principles empires didn't understand. But the practical effect was valuable. Species considering aggression against Earth or coalition members had to factor in that they'd be fighting opponents who didn't surrender, even when surrender was rational. The Death Worlder designation and humanity's reputation. In the galactic intelligence community, Earth acquired a designation that was equal parts respect and warning. Death Worlder species, threat classification, extreme. The classification wasn't based on military power. Dozens of species possessed superior technology and larger fleets. It was based on psychological profile and historical behavior pattern. Intelligence reports from multiple empires describe humanity in similar terms. Species demonstrates abnormal willingness to accept casualties in pursuit of abstract objectives. Standard cost-benefit analysis unreliable when applied to human decision-making. Possesses cultural framework that glorifies resistance against superior forces. Technological adaptation rate extreme. Reverse engineers captured systems within months. Recommendation: avoid engagement unless prepared for extended campaign with high casualties and uncertain outcome. Notable: human resistance inspired 30-plus Vassal rebellions in past 2 decades. Treating humans as targets of opportunity may trigger coalition response involving 40-plus species. Risk-reward assessment universally negative. The classification spread beyond official intelligence channels into popular culture and galactic mythology. Within a generation, Death Worlder entered common galactic vocabulary as both a specific designation for Earth-type high-gravity planets and a general term for species that fought with apparently suicidal determination. Young soldiers from a dozen species adopted it as a badge of honor. Resistance movements printed it on flags and banners. Empire military academies taught entire courses on Death Worlder doctrine and how to counter it. The honest conclusion? Don't fight Death Rollers if you can possibly avoid it. Humanity found the designation simultaneously amusing and annoying. They didn't think of themselves as crazy or suicidal, just committed to principles empires didn't understand. But the practical effect was valuable. Species considering aggression against Earth or coalition members had to factor in that they'd be fighting opponents who didn't surrender even when surrender was rational. A question that echoes across the stars. 50 years after the siege, historians across the galaxy debated the long-term implications of Earth's resistance. Some argued it had prevented galactic unification under benevolent hegemony, leaving the galaxy fragmented and vulnerable to external threats. Others countered that unity through conquest was tyranny regardless of how benevolent, and that the coalition's voluntary alliance represented true progress. The debate would continue for generations, but certain facts were undeniable. The galaxy of year 50 AS, after siege, Earth's resistance had become the galactic calendar's new epoch, looked radically different from year 0. 3 major empires had reformed along axiom lines, abandoning conquest for alliance. 4 others maintained traditional conquest doctrine, but operated far more cautiously, knowing resistance was possible. 89 species that had been vassals were now independent members of various alliances. And conquest itself had become prohibitively expensive and strategically questionable. Easier to invite species to ally than force them to submit. Earth's own evolution continued in unexpected directions. Having proven they could resist empire, humanity faced the question of what to build instead. The Terran Systems Alliance expanded to 12 colonized systems, but deliberately avoided becoming an empire by granting each colony full sovereignty within a federal structure. Earth exported tactical doctrine and defensive technology, but refused to export conquest or domination. Some human factions argued this was naive, that humanity should leverage their reputation to build a human empire. Others argued that becoming what they had resisted would invalidate everything they fought for. The debate was quintessentially human, loud, passionate, and ongoing. But policy remained clear. Earth would defend, assist, and ally, but would not conquer. It was a position that frustrated human expansionists and reassured galactic neighbors in equal measure. The Terran Tactical Institute on Luna, now the galaxy's premier military academy, graduated its 10,000th non-human officer in year 50 AS. The ceremony featured Admiral Chen's recorded speech about the siege, shown to every graduating class as a reminder of why the institute existed. But it also featured something new. An Axiom officer receiving top honors for a thesis on post-imperial defense doctrine, protecting without conquering. The symbolism was powerful. The species that tried to conquer Earth now studied at Earth's academy, learning not how to subjugate, but how to defend freedom. After the ceremony, a young Valari officer asked the Institute's human commandant a question that echoed the founding philosophy. "Admiral, we study tactics, strategy, and technology. But Earth won because of something that can't be taught from books. How do you teach someone to value freedom more than survival?" The commandant smiled. "You can't teach that, but you can show them it's possible. Earth show you. You show the next species. That's how ideas survive. Not through conquest, but through example." In the darkness between stars, exploration vessels from a dozen species pushed into uncharted space, seeking new worlds and new civilizations. They carried with them the lessons of the past 50 years. Approach as partners, not conquerors. Offer alliance, not subjugation. And remember that some species will fight rather than submit, no matter the cost. The galaxy remained dangerous, filled with unexplored regions and unknown threats. But one threat had diminished: the casual assumption that might made right and the conquest was the natural order. Earth hadn't ended conflict. Sapient beings would always find reasons to fight. But they had ended the age where empire was the only model of galactic civilization. Now there were choices, alternatives, and examples of species living free through mutual cooperation rather than enforced hierarchy. It wasn't utopia. It was messy, complicated, and constantly renegotiated. But it was better than the alternative of endless submission to whoever commanded the biggest fleet. The final words of Admiral Sarah Chen's memoir, published posthumously and translated into 300 languages, echoed across the galaxy. We didn't beat the Axiom through superior technology, brilliant tactics, or military genius. We beat them by refusing to accept their premise, that power gives the right to rule. Every species that fought for freedom after us did the same thing. They stopped calculating survival and started calculating dignity. That's the real weapon against empire, the willingness to say no and mean it, regardless of cost. Empires are built on the assumption that submission is inevitable. Free species exist because they prove that assumption wrong. As long as someone, somewhere, refuses to kneel, freedom survives. That's humanity's legacy. That's what 18 million people died for. And that's why the galaxy will never go back to the way it was. We changed the question from how do we survive conquest to why should we accept conquest at all? And once that question is asked, empires can't answer it. That's how you kill an empire. Not with weapons, but with a question they can't answer. What matters more, living comfortably on your knees or dying free on your feet? Humanity answered, the galaxy listened, and nothing was ever the same. Epilogue, the message in a bottle. 100 years after the siege, a human exploration vessel discovered something remarkable on the edge of known space. An ancient automated beacon, millions of years old, broadcasting a message in mathematical code that translated to simple words. We resisted, they left. Tell others empires can be defeated, not with power, with will. If you're reading this, we're gone, but the message survives. Pass it on. The discovery sparked intense archaeological investigation. The beacon's builders were long extinct, their civilization dust for eons. But they had faced empire, resisted, and succeeded long before humanity existed. Earth wasn't the first species to prove empires could be resisted. They were just the first to do it in this galactic cycle, at this moment in history. The realization was humbling and empowering simultaneously. Resistance wasn't a human innovation. It was a universal constant. Wherever intelligent beings valued freedom, they would fight for it. And as long as they fought, empires would never be inevitable. The beacon was moved to Luna and installed at the Terran Tactical Institute alongside Earth's own memorial. Two messages, separated by millions of years, saying the same thing. Refuse to surrender, and empires will fail. The galaxy continued turning. Civilizations rose and fell, and the eternal struggle between freedom and domination played out across a billion worlds. But thanks to an ancient beacon and a stubborn species called humanity, those who chose resistance had examples to follow and a simple truth to sustain them. Empires conquer until someone says no. And once someone says no and survives, everyone learns that no is possible. That was Earth's gift to the galaxy. Not military victory, but proof that victory wasn't necessary. Survival with dignity was enough. And that truth, once learned, could never be forgotten.